Although he is unappreciated and very few remembered him, if it were not for Mariner S. Eccles, the 1929 Depression would have been a whole lot worse. Eccles' big impact on history is that he helped save and stabilize the economy. Born September 9th, 1890 in Logan, Utah, he was the oldest child of Ellen and David Eccles. He was taught hard work and effort. So he would not grow up in idleness. His father sent 8-year-old Eccles to work at his lumber mill during the summer for 5 cents an hour carrying boxes. At age 11, Eccles finally saved up $100, which he used to buy a share of stock in his father's lumber company. Since then, he never ceased being a capitalist. Business years. When Eccles was 22, his father unexpectedly died. From the estate, his family received 2/7 interest in their father's business. Because Eccles was the oldest child in his family, he took control of the interest and managed them. Through hard work and thrift, Eccles grew all the businesses and became a multi-millionaire. By 1928, he had gained control of Sago Milk, Anderson Lumber, Utah Construction, and 17 banks, which were merged together into First Security.
And then in 1929, the market crashes and we find...
Eccles one day awoke and found himself in a metaphorical pit, because everyone was losing money from the Depression. Experts said it would only last a couple of weeks, but the weeks turned into a month, then a year, and the economy had only worsened, and the metaphorical pit had grown deeper. Eccles felt it vital to keep First Security Bank from going under, in order to save all of his customers' deposits. It looked like there was going to be a run on his bank. Eccles used his business sense and a good deal of bluffing to prevent an impending run on his bank. Although he was successful and saved First Security, Eccles then came to the realization that the government can and should help in the economy. Meanwhile, in 1933, the Senate Finance Committee was looking for a solution to the Depression. They called in 47 experts to ask for their answers. Most of them said either balance the budget or, I don't know. Eccles, who was the last people to testify, had some radical ideas and said that the government needed help for deficit spending and had a 5-point plan to help get through the Depression. Eccles' testimony before Congress became the basis for FDR's New Deal. Washington years. After testifying before Congress, President Roosevelt asked that Eccles become the assistant to Treasury Secretary Henry Morgenthau. After 10 months, Roosevelt requested that Eccles become governor of the Federal Reserve Board. Eccles said he would, but only if some major restructuring changes were made to the Fed. Eccles then drafted the Banking Act of 1935, which changed 3 things Eccles wanted changed. Title I. In 1933, when FDIC insurance was created, it was hard to qualify for. The first title said that FDIC insurance would become permanent and easier for banks to qualify for. Title II. Second title was made to make the Fed more independent. At that point, the Secretary of the Treasury was the ex officio leader of the Fed. It's hard to keep short-term politics out of the decision-making process. The second title was made to stop this. The second title also centralized the Fed, giving it control over the 12 district banks. That way, all the district banks would act as one, and no one would prefer one bank's politics over the others. Title III. Bankers who had borrowed money to pay off those loans by a certain upcoming date. If they couldn't pay off their loans, then they would lose their job. The third title extended the period that the bankers could pay their loans. A banker associate named E.G. Bennett then came up to Eccles saying that everyone liked the first and third title, but people didn't like the second title. If Eccles were to get rid of the second title, it would pass for sure, and Eccles would definitely get the job as governor of the Fed. However, Eccles was stubborn and pragmatic and replied, "You can tell your banker friends to go to hell. The governorship doesn't mean that much to me, but these changes must be made with or without me." In the end, the Banking Act of 1935 was passed. As chairman, Eccles encouraged deficit spending and manipulated interest rates, tax rates, reserve requirements, and currency supplies to stabilize the economy. By 1936, the economy was getting better. Mariner Eccles was on the cover of the February 10th, 1936 issue of Time magazine. We talked about the fair inflation and what Mariner planned to do to help. During 1936, the Fed increased the bank reserve requirements and the government reduced spending. The country then went into a terrible recession from 1937 to 38. Trying to recover from it, Eccles realized that raising the reserves was a bad idea and encouraged more deficit spending and modifying the taxes to collect more from the rich and less from the middle class, because the rich people were only buying as much as they were going to buy, but as the middle class had more money, they would spend more, thus helping the economy. During World War II, the Fed followed the Treasury's request that interest rates should be lowered, which allowed more money to be created. Although this extra money was meant to go towards the war effort, Eccles was just as concerned about inflation. There was a 65% increase in prices between 1941 and 46, and in 1941 to 42, 50 billion dangerous dollars were added to the money supply. To counteract the inflation, Eccles suggested a withholding tax on people to drastically reduce spending. After the war, Eccles said that we needed to balance the budget and fight inflation. However, Truman continued with his spending programs. Because of their differing fiscal and monetary views, in 1948, Truman did not reappoint Eccles the chairman of the Fed. However, Eccles still stayed on the Federal Reserve Board. There was still tension between the Fed and Treasury Secretary John Snyder as to how the interest rate should be continued after the war. So on January 31st, 1951, the Fed and President Truman had a meeting. At the meeting, they never actually talked about the interest rates, but the next day, there was a newspaper report saying that the Fed and the Treasury were in total agreement about interest rates. However, the newspaper people were suspicious. They asked Eccles if that was true. Eccles denied that the Fed was in agreement with the Treasury, and he later proved it by releasing the meeting minutes to the New York Times. Congress was fed up with all the arguing between the Fed and the Treasury. They issued the Douglas Committee report a year earlier, indicating the Treasury was to follow the Fed's lead on monetary policy, not the other way around. Congress instructed the Fed and the Treasury to meet and take care of their differences once and for all. This meeting was referred to as the Accord, and during it, a full and lasting separation was finally made between the Fed and the Treasury. Shortly after the Accord, Eccles resigned from the Fed and went back to Salt Lake City, Utah, where he went back to working in the family business and being run by his brother, George Eccles. As he went through life, he tried to speak of his concerns and solutions to any possible audience, spoke out against overpopulation and the Vietnam War, so that the U.S. should recognize Red China. Then, in 1977, December 18th, at age 87, he died. After Eccles. Today, few remember Mariner S. Eccles, but its policies still live on today. To honor Eccles, the Federal Reserve Building in Washington, D.C. was renamed to the Mariner S. Eccles Federal Reserve Board Building in 1982. There are also plans underway to add a statue of Eccles to the State of Utah Capitol Building Rotunda, one of its 4 niches. Eccles' legacy lives on the Mariner S. Eccles Foundation, which has funded many charitable, scientific, and educational organizations in Utah. Eccles also founded the Mariner S. Eccles Library and Graduate Fellowship of Political Economy at the University of Utah. In 1989, the centennial edition of the Wall Street Journal named Eccles one of the top people in the past 100 years who had a significant influence on our daily business. Conclusion. Eccles was an important individual in history, not only because of specific accomplishments of his 5-point plan, which became the basis of the New Deal, his architecting of the Big Connection from 1935, which created the Fed as we know today, and his indirect cause of the Accord, and the permanent separation between the Fed and the Treasury. More importantly, Eccles' pragmatic, stubborn, and outspoken personality, where he never wavered for what he believed to be the correct action. The pioneer in economics and convinced the countries that the economy could and should be manipulated by the government to create a stable economy where capitalism can flourish.
They called me Al, it was Al all the time. Say, don't you remember? I'm your pal, buddy, can you spare